Now, though, let's turn back to a mother from Kent who, you might remember, lost her 17-year-old son. He died 5 years ago this weekend after taking a powerful painkiller, and we've spoken to Kim Webster about it many times here on the Wake Up Call. Well, now she has made an emotional plea to teenagers not to experiment with substances over the summer holidays. She has returned to her son Will Hawley's old school in Herne Bay as part of an outreach programme highlighting the dangers of drugs. She told our reporter Alex Bish how awful it was being told what happened.
I knew at that moment I was never going to see him again. I then had to go home and I had to tell my parents, Will's grandparents, that their beloved grandson had died.
This Sunday marks 5 years since 17-year-old Will Hawley died after experimenting with a prescription drug. His mum, Kim, has been sharing her story with pupils at Herne Bay High School, where Will studied.
I do it because I get to talk about Will. I do it because of the feedback and the reaction we have from the kids. You know, with that, you see it in their faces when they're listening to Andy and myself. Then they're actually, you know, listening and digesting what we're having to say. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now.
Kim's now delivered the hard-hitting drugs message to over 25,000 children here in Kent. She's worked with the Kenward Trust in Yording, a charity that helps with addictions.
My name is Andy Watson and I work for Kenward in the community. So what I do is come alongside people, young people, encourage them to make right choices.
You pulled no punches, did you? You know, you talked about your own prison record, how you were ravaged by addiction, but you've turned it around, and obviously you're delivering that message to the children.
When I start showing them pictures, when I start talking about the situations that I found myself in, I see the whole persona of that young person start to melt.
Yeah, now, and you saw them listening to you intently, didn't you? When you were talking about having your teeth kicked in, when you were begging on the streets because you were someone at that point whose life was being ruined by drugs.
That's right, and in that, you know, it was the kindness that somebody showed me. Now, you don't find a lot of kindness on the street because it's like the dog eat the dog.
But someone gave you shelter, gave you a home for more than a year to get your life back on track, and you never forgot that?
Never forgot that. And also, secondly, on top of that, they were young people who did that.
So is there a greater threat, do you think, during the summer holidays?
I believe there is. During the summer holidays, there's a lot more freedom. There's a lot more opportunity to make that wrong choice.
Quite shocking, to be honest, how someone can just take one thing and their life changes completely.
In general, I always see things as every day being the same, but how something can change so suddenly really puts things into perspective.
With the summer holidays only days away, clearly there's a fear some children could end up experimenting with vaping, drinking, smoking, or taking drugs, or being targeted by drug dealers in the county.
John Boyes, principal at Herne Bay High School.
What did you make of Kim and Andy's presentation?
I thought it was particularly poignant with Will being an ex-Herne Bay High student. It's, you know, I think it was something that really hits home. And at this particular point of year, just before we go into the summer holidays, when, you know, the regularity of school and that bit of sort of organisation for a young person goes, and they have an extended period of time with necessarily different pressures, whether they're peer pressures, social media pressures, or just sometimes with some young people, boredom, you know, to actually have that really hard-hitting message and that really important message about making the right choices and thinking differently. It was just the right time to actually do it.
I've done a lot of reporting on county lines where people have come into Kent, haven't they, from London. Sometimes they're sending children to sell drugs. How do you manage that?
The way we manage it is by trying to educate and trying to do exactly what we've done today. How we have to be very mindful of it. We have children, unfortunately, as do all of the schools locally, that have connections or have exposure to many of the things that both Andy and Kim spoke around. And I think it would be naive to think that in any school situation that these young people aren't exposed to it.
And after 5 years of campaigning, Kim says she isn't giving up, and she wants to spread the word and her anti-drugs message to many more children here in the county.
They need to know the dangers of what's out there and what can be in the substances they use, because they don't really know. No one really knows, to be honest, what is in the pills, powder. It is potluck.
Alex Bish reporting there with Kim Webster doing brilliant work. Now let's talk to Penny Williams, the CEO of the Kenward Trust based in Yalding near Maidstone, which provides drugs and alcohol rehab and support. Penny, thank you for being here this morning. I mentioned how brilliant Kim is. It's very important, isn't it, that people hear her story, that they understand the dangers.
Good morning, Anna. Yes, Kim's story is very powerful. I've watched young people really engage with the story, and I think Kim's shared in the past several occasions where she's had feedback that her story has really hit home, and it's so important to educate our young people on the choices and the outcomes of some of those choices.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk quite a lot here on the Wake Up Call about drugs that might be Class A, Class B. What about prescription medicines, though? Obviously, they can be fatal. Have they become popular then among young people?
I think it's been a trend over the last few years that there is a perception, perhaps, that those drugs are safer because they're prescription. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, as Kim said, you don't know what that drug's going to do to you, and it's not safer. But yes, there is I suppose because they're to some extent easier to get hold of sometimes. So yeah, it has increased in the recent years.
And I suppose the question has to be why? Why are people turning to substances? This is the cohort that's been through the pandemic. So I suppose there might be a lot of emotional angst that needs to be dealt with before people turn to prescription medicines or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, from the rehab side of Kenward Trust, a lot of our residents have experienced trauma, and I strongly believe and have spoken a lot about this, that in the last few years during the pandemic, our young people in particular have been through a lot of trauma. Their lives have been turned upside down. They've been at home, perhaps with stressful families, and the inability to escape. A bit like Andy was saying about summer holidays, lack of routine, not meeting their friends during the pandemic has all resulted in some, I'd say, mental health issues, the desire to get away from that noise in your head, and alcohol, drugs, all gives the young people that opportunity.
Absolutely, and it's good to be wise to it. So if a parent or grandparent are listening, what's the advice and what should they do if they suspect maybe someone they love is taking these painkillers recreationally?
It's a very difficult challenge for all parents, and depending on the young person's age, it becomes even more challenging how much they can do. I mean, talking to your children is always the sort of starting point, depending on how bad the situation is. GPs are often a good starting point to look for referrals. But ultimately, we just need to educate our young people as much as possible. And that's why the work that Kenward does in the schools, I think, is so key. It's the education and prevention that we don't spend enough time on.
Absolutely. And you're actually doing outreach work in the community in Sevenoaks as well, aren't you, with Kim?
Yes, and we've been doing that for over 15 years now. Trying to talk to young people, trying to help them out of situations. I mean, Andy in particular has engaged with a lot of young people in county lines and helping them find ways out of the situation that they're in. It is incredibly sad and a situation that is growing very fast at the moment.
And I suppose, again, coming back to Kim's story, it's so important because for a lot of young people, perhaps they don't realise the perils of what they're dabbling in.
No, and as I said earlier, I think in terms of just trying to escape whatever their life has, or the trauma, or just that desire to have something different going on and just escape the noise in their head, it's very difficult to help them move away from that.
Indeed. On that point, Penny, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Penny Williams is the CEO of the Kenward Trust, which is based in Yalding near Maidstone. Now, this is what we've had from the government on all of this. It says teaching about the risks of drugs is part of the compulsory health education, and they've worked with experts to make sure high quality teaching resources are available. On funding, the government has launched a 10-year drugs strategy, which includes 780 million specifically earmarked for drugs treatment. And by the way, if you've been affected by what you've been hearing this morning, then don't forget there's lots of help, support and advice for you on our Action Line site here at the BBC. So go to bbc.co.uk/action line, and you'll see there lots of contact